Welcome to our deep dive into Why Are We Yelling? The Art of Productive Disagreement.
Hmm.
We're going to be exploring
Yeah.
the key takeaways from this book by Buster Benson
You're right.
and look at how we can turn disagreements into something productive.
It's interesting. I think a lot of people are really resonating with this book.
Yeah.
It's got like a 3.63 rating on Goodreads from 954 ratings.
This is pretty good. Yeah.
And Benson himself, the author, Buster Benson,
Yeah.
has quite a background. You know, he's an entrepreneur and a writer, and he's got experience at Twitter and Slack and Patreon.
Wow.
Not to mention, he also co-founded 750words.com,
I've heard of that.
which is that website for journaling.
Oh, yeah.
Clearly, he's thought a lot about communication and introspection.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So the book starts off by asking this big question that I think we all have.
Yeah.
Why do we yell?
Right. You would think it's all about like wanting to be right.
Right.
Or win the argument.
Yeah.
But as Benson explores these root causes of conflict,
Yep.
he uncovers something much deeper.
Okay.
He talks about these feelings of uncertainty and fear and how they can really drive defensiveness.
I can relate to that.
Yeah.
When I feel like my ideas are being dismissed or misunderstood,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes my voice does get a little bit louder, and it's probably coming from that place of uncertainty.
Yeah.
But there's more to it, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
He doesn't stop at just those big emotions.
Okay.
He goes into the nuances of why those feelings escalate into yelling.
Right.
He even breaks down, those moments when you feel disrespected
Yeah.
or undervalued.
Totally.
Like someone is just attacking your core beliefs.
Yeah.
So it's no wonder things get heated.
It's like the stakes suddenly feel so high,
Mm,
and that fight or flight response kicks in.
right.
And that leads us perfectly into chapter 2,
Okay.
where he introduces these 4 traps we fall into during unproductive arguments.
Yeah.
I've got to admit, I saw myself in a few of these.
Oh, they're surprisingly relatable.
Yeah.
But of the 4,
Okay.
the ones that really stand out to me are illusory certainty
Okay.
and the villain hero narrative.
Let's break those down.
Sure.
Illusory certainty, as I understand it,
Yeah.
is that feeling of being absolutely 100% sure you're right,
Precisely.
no matter what.
It's like you're wearing blinders,
Yeah.
You become so convinced of your own perspective
Mhm.
that you completely shut down any other possibilities.
Okay.
And this plays out in all sorts of scenarios.
Right.
Imagine like a debate about climate change.
Right.
If someone's stuck in illusory certainty,
Okay.
they won't even consider any evidence that challenges their view,
Yeah.
no matter how valid it might be.
So it's not just about being stubborn.
Right.
It's about being completely closed off
Yeah,
to any other perspective.
exactly.
That can definitely lead to some heated moments.
For sure.
And then there's the villain hero narrative.
Yeah.
I think this one shows up a lot in personal relationships.
It's so classic. Think about like those arguments
Yeah.
where each person sees themselves as the victim
Uh-huh.
and the other person as the villain.
Right.
It becomes impossible to find a resolution.
Yeah.
Because everyone's so focused on proving their own innocence
Right.
and the other person's guilt.
It's like those old westerns where the good guy wears the white hat
Right.
and the bad guy wears the black hat.
Exactly.
No nuance, just pure good versus pure evil.
Yeah.
But in reality, things are rarely that simple.
Exactly right.
We're all complex individuals
Yeah.
with our own perspectives and experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And when we get stuck in these simplistic narratives,
Yeah.
it becomes impossible to have a productive conversation.
It really does.
I've got these 2 big traps, illusory certainty
Right.
and the villain hero narrative.
Mm-hmm.
And they really do seem to be at the heart of a lot of unproductive arguments.
Yeah.
But the question is, now that we're aware of them,
Yeah.
can we actually avoid falling into them?
That's where things get really interesting. Okay. Benson doesn't just leave us hanging with these insights.
Yep.
He provides a whole set of tools and strategies for having more constructive conversations, even when disagreements arise.
I like it.
And that's what we'll explore in the next part of our deep dive.
Awesome. I'm ready. So we've identified some of the traps we fall into, but how do we actually start having more productive conversations? I'm ready for some solutions.
Benson definitely delivers on that front. He offers a bunch of tools and strategies, and what's great is that they're grounded in psychological research.
Right. And in chapter 3, he talks about shifting our mindset from winning to learning.
Right.
It's about turning those disagreements into shared explorations of the truth.
Exactly.
But how do we actually do that?
He emphasizes the power of curiosity and asking questions instead of just trying to prove our point.
Yeah.
We can approach the conversation with a genuine desire to understand the other person's perspective.
It's like turning an argument into a research project. But instead of digging into data, we're digging into each other's thoughts and feelings.
And that's where empathy becomes crucial.
Okay?
It's about stepping into the other person's shoes, trying to see the world from their point of view.
Yeah.
And it's not always easy, especially when we feel strongly about something.
I know. I can struggle with it. I get so caught up in my own emotions
Yeah.
that it's hard to see things through any other perspective.
We all do that from time to time.
Okay.
And that's where some of the specific tools Benson offers can be really helpful.
Okay.
In Chapter 4, he talks about self-distancing,
Okay.
which basically means taking a step back from the heat of the moment.
Okay, so imagine you're in the middle of a disagreement and things are getting heated.
Yeah.
How do you actually self-distance? It seems pretty hard to just flip a switch and detach from your emotions.
It definitely takes practice, but Benson suggests trying to view the situation as an observer,
Okay.
almost like you're watching a movie.
Okay.
You can ask yourself, what's happening here? What are the different perspectives involved?
Yeah.
What are my own biases and triggers?
I like that analogy. It's about creating some space between yourself and the situation.
Right.
So you can respond more thoughtfully instead of just reacting.
Exactly. And another tool he introduces is the ladder of inference,
Right.
which is a model for understanding how we jump from observations to conclusions.
That sounds intriguing. Can you break that down for us?
Think about it like climbing a ladder.
Yeah.
At the bottom, we have our observations,
Okay.
what we actually see and hear.
Yeah.
But then we start climbing the ladder, adding our interpretations, our assumptions, and our beliefs.
Okay.
And often we miss steps along the way,
Yeah.
which leads to faulty logic and misunderstandings.
So it's about slowing down and examining our thought process.
Mm-hmm.
Are we making assumptions? Are we jumping to conclusions? Are we letting our emotions cloud our judgment?
Right. And by becoming aware of those potential pitfalls,
Yeah.
we can start to catch ourselves before we climb too high up the ladder and end up in a heated argument based on faulty logic.
Okay, this is starting to feel very actionable.
Mhm.
So we've got self-distancing to help us detach from the immediate emotional intensity of the moment.
Yeah.
And we've got the ladder of inference to help us check our assumptions and logic.
Right.
What other tools does Benson offer?
He also emphasizes the importance of active listening, which we've touched on before, but it's worth reiterating.
Okay.
Active listening isn't just about hearing the words. It's about truly understanding the message the other person is trying to convey.
It's about being fully present and engaged in the conversation, not just waiting for your turn to speak.
Right.
And I guess that ties back to curiosity and empathy, those core principles we talked about earlier.
Absolutely. And in Chapter 5, he really dives into those core skills for better communication and conflict resolution,
Okay.
providing practical exercises we can use to strengthen those muscles.
I'm curious to hear about those exercises.
Yeah.
Give us some examples. What can we start doing today to improve our communication skills?
He encourages us to practice nodding to show engagement,
Okay.
summarizing the speaker's points to make sure we understand,
Yeah.
and asking clarifying questions to delve deeper into the conversation.
Those are all things we can start doing right away.
Right.
And they're not just for those big, heated arguments.
Mm,
We can use them in everyday conversations to improve communication across the board.
exactly. He also offers suggestions for practicing perspective taking.
Okay.
He says to remind ourselves that everyone's experiences are unique, and we need to approach conversations with a mindset of learning and understanding
Yeah.
rather than judging or blaming.
So it's about letting go of the assumption that our way of seeing things is the only right way.
Yeah.
And I think that's especially important in today's world,
Yeah.
where everyone seems to be so entrenched in their own beliefs.
It's definitely a challenge.
Yeah.
But if we can cultivate that sense of openness and curiosity, it can really transform the way we relate to each other.
This is starting to feel very hopeful. It's like we're not doomed to endless cycles of unproductive arguments. We can actually learn to communicate more effectively and build stronger relationships,
Right.
even in the face of conflict.
That's exactly what Benson is arguing for.
I like it.
And in Chapter 6, he takes it a step further,
Right.
looking at how we can create environments
Yeah.
where conflict is less likely to arise in the first place.
Okay.
He calls it building a conflict-resilient mindset and environment.
Okay. I'm intrigued.
Yeah.
Tell us more about this idea of a conflict-resilient environment.
He emphasizes the importance of psychological safety.
Okay.
It's about creating an atmosphere where people feel comfortable expressing their thoughts and concerns without fear of being ridiculed or punished.
So it's about building trust and mutual respect. Yeah. Knowing you can speak your mind without being shut down.
Precisely.
Okay.
And he also talks about establishing clear communication norms.
Okay.
Maybe it's taking turns to speak, avoiding interruptions, or using reflective language to confirm understanding.
Those are such simple things, but they can make a huge difference in creating a more respectful and productive communication environment.
And he stresses the importance of modeling positive communication behaviors.
Yep.
Leaders in organizations and families play a big role here.
Yeah.
When they demonstrate openness, empathy, and a willingness to collaborate, it sets the tone for everyone else.
It's like saying, look, conflict is inevitable, but we're going to handle it with grace and respect.
Yeah.
We're going to listen to each other, trying to understand each other's perspectives, and work together to find solutions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that kind of modeling can have a ripple effect, creating a culture where people feel safe to engage in disagreements without resorting to yelling or personal attacks.
This is all sounding very promising,
Yeah.
but I'm noticing a theme here. It seems like a lot of this comes down to individual responsibility. We can't control how other people behave, but we can control how we respond to them.
You're absolutely right. And in the final chapter, Benson really drives that point home, offering concrete steps we can take to apply these principles in our own lives.
Okay.
He provides a roadmap for moving forward, not just as individuals, but as communities.
I'm ready to hear about that roadmap. What actionable steps can we take to transform conflict into something more productive? We'll find out in the final part of our deep dive. We're back, and I'm excited to dig into this final chapter of why are we yelling?
Yeah.
We've uncovered so much about the roots of conflict, but now it's time to talk about moving forward, actually putting these insights into action.
And that's exactly what Benson focuses on in Chapter 7. He calls it moving forward, applying lessons to transform relationships and communities. It's like he's giving us this toolbox filled with concrete strategies for making those changes.
So it's not just about understanding why we yell.
Right.
It's about actually changing the way we communicate.
Exactly.
I'm ready for some practical advice.
Yeah.
What are some of the key takeaways from this final chapter?
Well, the first thing Benson stresses is self-reflection. He says we need to understand our own triggers and biases before we can even begin to have more productive conversations.
That makes sense. It's like that saying, know thyself.
Right.
We need to be aware of our own emotional baggage before we can start unpacking other people's.
Exactly. And he suggests taking some time to think about those relationships where disagreements tend to escalate.
Okay.
What are your hot button issues? How do you typically react in those situations?
It's like taking a personal inventory of our conflict patterns.
Right.
What sets us off?
Yeah.
What are our default responses? Once we understand those patterns, we can start to interrupt them and choose a different path.
Right. And of course, he reiterates the importance of active listening,
Yeah.
which we've talked about a lot.
Yeah,
But I don't think it can be overstated.
for sure.
It's about being fully present, paying attention to both the verbal and nonverbal cues, and demonstrating empathy.
And that's not always easy, especially when we're in the middle of a disagreement.
Right.
Our emotions can get the best of us. That's why Benson suggests practicing perspective taking.
Yeah.
Really making an effort to see things from the other person's point of view.
It's so important.
You know, it's interesting because earlier we were talking about the villain-hero narrative.
Right.
And I think perspective taking is the antidote to that.
Right.
If we can step outside of our own story and try to understand the other person's story, it becomes much harder to see them as the villain.
That's a great point. It's about recognizing that their experiences and values are just as valid as our own,
Yeah.
even if we don't agree with them. And that leads to another key takeaway, reframing the narrative.
Okay, what does that mean? Reframing the narrative.
Instead of seeing disagreements as battles to be won, Benson suggests looking for common ground.
Okay.
What are the shared goals? Can we find points of agreement? Can we work together towards a solution that benefits everyone involved?
So it's about shifting from a mindset of opposition to a mindset of collaboration.
I like that.
See,
Feels
well-
much more constructive. But I'm wondering, how do we create that kind of environment? Seems like it takes more than just one person changing their behavior.
You're right, it takes a collective effort.
Yeah.
And that's why Benson talks about the importance of fostering a culture of open dialogue,
Right.
both in our personal relationships and in our communities.
I think we touched on this earlier when we were talking about psychological safety. It's about creating spaces where people feel safe to express their thoughts and concerns without fear of judgment or retaliation.
Exactly, and that requires a certain level of trust and mutual respect.
Mm.
We need to believe that we can disagree without destroying the relationship.
This has been such an insightful deep dive.
Yeah.
I feel like I've gained so many valuable tools for navigating conflict more constructively.
Yeah.
But I also feel a sense of responsibility. It's like, okay, I have all this knowledge now. What am I going to do with it? That's the million-dollar question, and I think Benson would say that it's an ongoing process. It's about making a conscious effort to practice these skills, to be more mindful of our communication, to create those spaces for open dialogue.
So for you listening, think about one relationship in your life where these insights could make a difference. Maybe it's a coworker, a family member, or a friend. What's one small step you can take today to start shifting the dynamic?
Remember, you don't have to do everything perfectly. Just start by incorporating one or two of these tools into your interactions. Maybe it's practicing active listening, or maybe it's taking a moment to self-distance before reacting. Every small step counts.
And if you found this conversation valuable, I highly encourage you to pick up Why Are We Yelling? We've only scratched the surface of the insights it offers. It's a book that can really transform the way you approach conflict, not just in your personal life, but in all aspects of your life.
It's about recognizing that conflict is an inevitable part of the human experience, but it doesn't have to be destructive. It can actually be an opportunity for growth, connection, and positive change.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Here's to having more productive and maybe even a little less shouty conversations in the future.